Welcome to another edition of Real Life Renos, the podcast. I'm your host, Karen Brown, and for those who are new to the podcast, I'm an aging in place and accessibility strategist. Today we're going to talk about our hopes, wishes, and dreams for accessibility in 2024, and to do that, I am joined by one of my favorite guests, Ron Wickman. Ron is an architect who spent his career working with accessible design, and he joins us from Edmonton, Alberta. Welcome, Ron.
Thanks. It's great to be back. Actually, I kind of one of my hopes would be to do more of these this year.
We can make that come true.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We are going to start off by taking a look at a document that contains survey results. It was a survey that was done by the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada. It's rather lengthy, so we won't go through all of it. But Ron, if you'd like to speak to this, I think it's a really interesting article. I read the whole thing, as did you, and it's all marked up because we were having an email conversation back and forth about it.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. When I read the article myself, I was pleasantly surprised at the results, meaning that a vast majority of Canadians are very interested in making our built environment more inclusive. And inclusive is a pretty lofty word. It doesn't always relate to just accessibility or disability issues, but inclusion for everybody. And that means everybody. So I think most people are well aware of issues that are happening, especially here in North America, with people of uh, different skin color, that sort of thing. But I find that a lot of times our discussions about inclusivity doesn't always include people with disabilities. So I think that this study does show that a good number of people really want us to, as architects, to weigh in and do a better job of making our built environment more accessible for people with disabilities. Other issues like fighting climate change, I think has been around for a little while now, more than 25 years, but it's also at the forefront of our thinking these days. And the other thing that I was very interested in when I was in school as well is this idea of engaging people when we design as architects as well. So a lot of times I think, and too often we think that because we've been trained, we know better, and so we just design accordingly. But nobody knows better what they need than the people who actually use the spaces. So certainly my work, which is focused on people with disabilities, I can't design without including my clients in the design process. So that's something that certainly is high amongst younger architects entering into the profession. So very optimistic in my thinking as we move forward towards creating a more inclusive, socially engaging, and environmentally friendly built environment.
One of the statistics, if I remember the number correctly from reading through this, just to speak to what you said about involving people in the process, of all the people who had ever commented on a development in their community, 46% of them didn't feel like they were being heard. Only 7% felt like anybody was really paying attention to what they were saying, which is kind of sad.
That's right. And again, the I think what happens is certainly in my experience as a let's say just a citizen, when things are happening around the city, initiatives here in Edmonton. There's been a lot of talk about bike lanes, for example, and changes to public transit and so on. Uh, that kind of that kind of information is out there in kind of social media, and then they have work shops, I guess you could say, or open houses where people can come in and raise their concerns and give their opinions. But by and large, you have to be pretty savvy and know what's going on in the city to know that these events are happening, and then they're not always that open. Really, they're like it's one day. Maybe during the day people work. Often I think the bureaucratic people, the city administration thinks, well, we are making it available. You can weigh in and give your opinions, but it's not really as open um, as one might think. And then in defense of all of that, how do you get people to an open house and so on? A lot of people just don't, unfortunately, don't really care as much about things until it really, kind of hits their backyard, so to speak. So overall, we just need a more kind of engaging community spirit to get our cities to be more socially responsible and environmentally friendly and certainly more inclusive.
I also feel that voter turnouts give us a lot of information. Just if we look at the numbers, the voter turnouts have been really low. And at the municipal level, which is the level of government closest to the people, those low numbers really tell me how much they think it really matters what their vote is. The decisions are going to be made, and they're just going to go on with their lives. And yeah, they don't turn up for budget meetings. I mean, at my local council, maybe one or two people will come and sit in the gallery for the budget meetings, and that's about it. And it's not that people don't care what their taxes are, it's they feel that, I think it just doesn't matter. But if we were more engaged, it's sort of a rock and a hard place, because I feel like if people were more engaged, then they would do a better job of electing people who truly represented what the community wants. Instead, especially in small communities, we elect based on who's popular, who talks to you in the grocery store, who's your buddy that you went to school with and grew up with. That kind of voting is the wrong way to look at it, in my
Yeah.
view.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And my background has been in politics and activism, just because of the nature of how I grew up with a father who did use a wheelchair and was a civic politician and a provincial MLA here in Alberta, an activist. So it's in my blood, and I've kind of steered away from becoming a politician, but I'm very political in my the way that I work as an architect and the way I engage uh, our our uh, our politicians. So I am personally quite active in talking with various politicians and try to get them to buy into a lot of these ideas. But by and large, I think they're certainly more than ever in my view. This feeling of hopelessness amongst the voters is certainly there, and it seems no matter what we do, um, the um, the politicians are just going to make decisions that uh, benefit them or whatever. I'm not even sure what their goals are anymore, um, in terms of what our cities could look like and what our culture could be like, right? So we seem a little bit lost right now in that sense, and I don't know how to get us back on
No,
track.
no, that's okay. You made a good segue just a few seconds ago. We were going to talk about hopes and dreams. So when you're
Yeah.
talking about wanting things to be different, what would your number one hope, dream, wish be for 2024?
it, it it's this idea of education for sure, and that's been at the core of my hopes, and as I start begin every new year, is like how do we educate people. And uh, I remember way back in the mid 90s, the 1990s, having been the author of what's called a flex housing project, which Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation had a competition where they asked architects and builders to come up with ideas on how to create housing that's more adaptable, more flexible for a different variety of family types, multi-generational housing, people working at home, garden suites for parents that are coming back to live with their children, children that aren't leaving their home, and of course, being accommodating for people with disabilities, especially as they age. And, 95, I remember doing a talk at a CMHC function where I was asked whether this flex housing concept is a trend or a niche market. And I said, it's a niche market right now, but in the next 5 years, I believe it'll be a trend. That was roughly 1995. So my thinking was that by 2000 we'd be all over this flex housing idea and all of this. Well, it's 2024, and we're we're still not there. So I guess the education, first and foremost, is looking at a kind of global concept of educating as many people as we can. So that would include our politicians, our decision makers, builders and developers, other architects and designers, the general public, the building industry, the trades. Just really try to educate in the most global sense possible. And my just quickly, my second hope is, seeing as I kind of said it already, is again this idea of the next five. So now, 2024, by 2029, 2030, let's say, thereabouts, um, can we achieve this goal of having this higher education? And something I've been saying for the last number of years now is that I think a big missing piece in this education is that we still haven't achieved a critical mass of people who really understand what inclusion, what disability issues are really all about. And in our world of climate change and sustainable issues, design, we have achieved a critical mass. So when you have the media out there talking about the issues or interviewing experts, they themselves have quite a good understanding of the issues. So the conversation between somebody, a reporter, let's say, and an expert is more engaging, more informative, because there's a real dialogue, as opposed to somebody just saying, well, what do you think? Or tell me what you know. So it's not one-sided. And I'm hoping that I can get to a point where I feel like I'm no longer just educating. I want to be in a position where I feel like I'm being educated myself. So I want to be in a group of peers who have a similar understanding as myself, so that we can really dig deep into the issues and come up with very good and clever solutions.
That's a noble wish, and I would certainly hope that that would come true. And it's actually very closely aligned with, pardon the honking, I'm actually in a very active construction zone right now, and it sounds like the snack truck may have shown up. So we'll just keep on going. So my number one wish would be that homeowners and tenants alike would educate themselves about the possibilities that are available to them. As we've discussed before, we have this stock of old houses that have not really changed in terms of building methods and the barriers that are inherently built in houses for decades and decades. So people are having to deal with houses that actually have a lot of potential to injure them. There are things we can do to alleviate that. And the information is out there. It's perhaps harder to find when people hire people like you or like me. It's second nature to us, and we can certainly tell them, but that's not something that everybody is going to do. Instead, what I find is that people become frozen with fear. They don't know which way to go, they don't know what decision is best, and so they do nothing. As I say to them often, not making a decision is making a decision. And I think that what maybe governments at all levels need to understand is that if we build homes that actually allow people to live safely, independently, and with dignity, they can stay there longer. There's an effect on the healthcare system. I think in terms of the illnesses that people have, the injuries that people have, that the need for long-term care would reduce. That people would perhaps only have to leave their homes for the last year or two of their lives when they may need more care or highly specialized care. That would be, for me, if people would take the time to educate themselves. There's a lot of good material out there. They can listen to these podcasts. We've done podcasts on entry and bathrooms and vertical access that give people a ton of information. So those kinds of things I think would be really cool. I think my second wish aligns with yours very well also, that governments at all levels would embrace accessible, visitable, and adaptable housing. As as I have said to you, online and offline, when a project comes to a municipality or a county and they put restrictions on them, like we want 20% of the homes to be accessible or 10% to be visitable, the builders don't like that, and they'll just go down the road to the next municipality or county that doesn't give them those restrictions because, of course, they're in business to make money. Completely understand that. However, that's not necessarily building the way that people need. As I just said, we haven't changed our methods in a long time. The flex housing that you brought up, you would call it flex housing, I call it adaptable housing. I think we're talking about exactly the same thing.
Yes, yeah, we are. Yeah.
This business of a home that people can buy. And I mean, housing is expensive. So once you're able to get into that, do you need somebody to help pay the rent? Well, why don't we build a section, a self-contained apartment? You could take down the wall at some point if you wanted to, or leave it up, whatever, that a tenant could be in and help pay the rent. Maybe as your children get older and come home from college, or they're working their first job and they need to save money, that's where they could live. Maybe mom and dad ultimately move into that space while an older child takes over the main house, and then that is generational living, which is gaining in popularity. There are so many more things that we could do if only we would embrace flex housing.
Hmm. And just to talk a little bit about more about flex housing for those that don't know,
Yeah.
uh, the term flex housing was coined by a gentleman who worked at Canada Mortgage and Housing, and it really encompassed three words, which was affordable, adaptable, and accessible. So adaptable in the sense that you just talked about. So not just for adaptable to accommodate somebody, let's say, who goes from walking around to being in a wheelchair, but adaptable in the sense of how we can live. So this idea of having a home that lends itself to having a suite for a mom or dad that comes to live with their adult kids, or the adult child who is in university and can't or doesn't want to move yet, right? So people working out of their home, again in 1995, these were a bit more novel in terms of their thoughts. And it was quite popular, and CMHC really promoted it for a good, I'd say a good 10 years maybe. And after about 5 years, it started to sort of fade a little bit. And the CMHC then focused its attention on sustainable issues and climate change and so on, creating net zero housing, that sort of thing. And it's only been again in the last 5 years or so that Canada Mortgage and Housing has approached me, now younger people that are just reading about flex housing for the first time, asking me what I know about it. And I go, I know
Right.
quite a bit about it. so, but the flex housing concept has become more of an issue today because of our aging population. So now it's being recognized that, these are all really good ideas, because we have hit certainly a critical mass of uh, older people out there now that we're going, wow, this is like there's a real housing issue here, right?
Right.
So now these issues are sort of coming back again. But for me, I guess it seems a little bit unfortunate that it I have this feeling that we're like starting over again, right? Like I have to re-educate people about flex housing because the ones that started it are retired or passed on, that kind of thing. So uh, it is a little bit tricky sometimes to go, wow, okay, we gotta try this one again, right? Um,
We could actually modernize the concept a little bit by not having the flex part of the housing of the house built into the house, because so many municipalities and counties now are wanting and allowing one, two, or even in some cases three additional homes on the same property.
yeah,
So, I mean, there's nothing more bizarre to me than somebody saying they've got a granny suite and it's in the basement.
yeah,
That
that's right. Yeah,
that just
yeah.
hits
And
me
there
wrong. But if there was a granny suite in the back, that could be the flex. And
mhm.
if only, like, I know builders want to build on these 33-foot lots. If only on that first floor they would build a den or even a dining room that could eventually be transitioned into a primary bedroom, and a washroom that has a Euro shower, because that sounds way
Mhm.
sexier than
Yeah.
barrier free shower, or even a wet room. We've talked about wet rooms before. If only they would do that sort of thing, there's your
Y
flexibility.
yeah, exactly. And, those are really great points, and it sort of brought to my attention again, reminded me that the big shift in this flex housing concept, with the current members of Canada Mortgage and Housing is that they do think about it as a multi-family housing situation rather than the single-family housing situation. So, in 1995, we were completely focused on this idea that we could make single-family homes more adaptable, more affordable, more accessible. Today, conditions are such that that's a big challenge, especially the affordability bit, right, to single family housing. So CMHC now is saying, in terms of the flex housing concept, it really does relate to multifamily. So low rise apartment buildings, condos, taller condo buildings, and they're really focusing their attention on that, and realizing that the single family house is still something that's not uh, attainable by a lot of people anymore, unfortunately. Yeah.
Right, right.
And just one other thing I just wanted to add that I think is really important to your hope, your first one, about educating the public, the
Hmm.
people who are want this kind of housing. Uh, you mentioned something about just having like a no step entrance, for example. We've talked about this issue before in podcasts that we've done previously, uh, but essentially not having steps at the front door, so pretty much anybody can get in, but that includes somebody using a walker, somebody in a wheelchair, uh, young parents pushing a baby carriage, somebody carrying a bike, people carrying furniture. All of these things make life easier if you have no steps at the front door. uh, what happens is your buying public might read an article or see a feature on the news and they go, oh, this no step entrance, that's a great idea. And then they go to their builder and they say, I'd like to build a house without steps at the front door. And the builders will actually say, oh, you can't do that, the code doesn't allow you to do that. So again, it goes back to that lack of education, and the homeowner doesn't have the knowledge to challenge what the builder's saying. So then they go ahead and build the house with steps. And the
Right.
builders are wrong. I'm not saying every builder, of course not, but a lot of builders will do that either because they really don't know that it can be done, or they just don't want to learn themselves, right? They just want to get the sale and get it built and
Cookie cutter.
make their money, so it's that's the challenge that you're talking about. That's obviously something that I've been working on as well for quite a length of time.
Right. Right. What would be your third wish?
Yeah. Well, first I'm going to just go back to my second wish, because I the second wish is a bit more specific to this idea of education. And what I'm really interested in today as an architect is dealing with the idea of accessibility. And for me, accessibility relates to people with disabilities. So in my own definition of things, when we talk about inclusive housing, or inclusive design, or even universal design, we really are talking about um, all people, um, anywhere, age 8 to 80 kind of thing. There's a urban design firm that calls themselves 8 to 80. So uh, when I speak of accessibility, then I speak of it as specific to uh, people with disabilities. And so I'm trying to make sure that other designers, especially, and architects, because that's my profession, understand this concept, so that when they do get involved in issues around climate change and fighting climate change with their designs, dealing with disaster relief, which is a lot of disasters are happening because of climate change. And most importantly for me is this issue around affordable housing. In our quest to create more environmentally friendly buildings, create housing quickly after a natural disaster like a fire or a flood, or create affordable housing, what often happens is the needs of people with disabilities are forgotten, because all of the other issues sort of rise to the top, and they're hard enough, right? So if I come along and say, well, what about people in wheelchairs? It's like, oh man, that's just you've just added another layer to this that just makes our quest to find solutions that much harder, right? So that's kind of what I talk about the next 5 years. I'd like to really hone in on those issues specifically.
You
And
you used a really funny analogy when we were talking a couple of weeks ago about the Stanley. I
mm,
think this is a
mhm.
this is a great time to repeat that on our
Yeah,
podcast.
yeah, yeah. It is kind of funny, yeah, because
It is.
um, I and now I'm hearing, like, since we spoke a couple of weeks ago, people are paying astronomical amounts of money to get these cups. Like, it's really bizarre.
I know.
Um, and I think what's and again, I'm not the expert on Stanley mugs, but
It was the analogy.
yeah, apparently they're like incredibly durable. They keep your liquids inside cold or hot forever. And so not only are they sort of I don't know, maybe stylish, I guess, or they're people want to have them because they're kind of cool, but they really work. And I think ultimately that's why people are really buying into them, is it really works. And then after something like this gains traction, then it almost becomes a bit of a style thing. Like you have to have one because everybody else does. But when we were talking about that, was I was saying that I would love to see that happen in this world of the no step entrance. Like, could we create a buzz around the no step entrance that everybody sees the benefits of it, and they have to have it, and they're willing to
Yep.
even pay more money for it, right? And what I can tell you is that it does not cost more money to do a no step entrance. Once you've overcome, having done it a couple of times, it's always a little, when you've never done something before, it just takes time to learn, and sometimes you make a bit of a mistake and it costs some money, but eventually you get to a point where it really doesn't cost anything more.
Right.
But then we want to get to that point, and the analogy I used in the building industry that is kind of, I guess similar to the sort of Stanley Mug concept, is the engineered truss. So in my time, having graduated in the early early 1990s and got into this architecture field, we were building houses with what we call dimensional lumber. So that's 2x8s, 2x10s, 2x12s. So they're used for our floor joists specifically. And one of the common complaints about the floor joist was that in time, because they're made of wood, they dry. They dry over time when they're in an indoor environment, and you put wood flooring on top. Your subfloor is wood and the wood joists, and you nail them in, and eventually you start getting little creaks and sounds that as you walk on the floor, and these seem to be really annoying for people that owned houses like that. And the engineered floor truss came along, and it doesn't shrink. It's an engineered. It's engineered. So that was the original idea of promoting this floor system. They called it the silent floor system. So no more squeaks. And that was really how it was promoted. And I think a lot of people were like, yeah, okay, that's great. But when you looked at how much extra it would cost at the time, it was about 3 times the cost of dimensional lumber. And it was only after some people started using these engineered floor joists that they realized, well, you can actually span greater distances with these trusses. So you would eliminate uh, uh, bearing walls or teleposts in your basement. Uh, the the middle of the trusses were open to get some heating ductwork through the truss space, uh, electrical wires, and so on, plumbing lines. So all of a sudden, you could have in your basement a sort of smooth ceiling without little bump downs and bulkheads and that sort of thing. And a lot of people thought, well, that would give my basement a more stylish look, and that's kind of a great thing. And then of course, the trades, the plumbers, the electricians, the heating contractors, they found it much easier to work with, and thus it reduced their hours and their fees to do the work. And so all of a sudden, I graduated in 1991, so in 1991, it's all dimensional lumber. Engineered trusses are more expensive, so they're only for people that are willing to spend the money on them. By 1994, 95, it had almost completely shifted to the engineered truss, and they were now on par, if not cheaper than dimensional lumber. So in a very short period of time, that whole part of the industry completely shifted, because again, I would say there was a critical mass of people understanding all of the benefits of the trust. So it wasn't just it was benefiting the builder and they were making more money, um, or it was benefiting somebody in the a buyer. Um, it was benefiting everybody overall. So everybody saw the value of this. And again, I would go back to um, the no step entrance, or you called the Euro bathroom, or I call it the wet room.
Euro
This
shower. Yeah.
idea, yeah, the Euro shower, like the idea of
Yeah.
creating a bathroom that's like a big wet room, right? We've talked about that one too.
Yep.
Those two are just key to our building industry. If we can, those two things, if they were just standard, it would be a game changer for sure.
So we've got to make everybody want it the way that everybody wants a Stanley.
Correct. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
I've been trying to figure that out, but if anybody is listening and has some marketing ideas, I
Go
think
for it.
you could probably make a lot of money doing this, right? So I think it'll come, but it's just like, how do we speed up the process, right? So that we can just be there a lot sooner.
Right. Well,
Hmm.
that may segue into my third wish, which is around a federal announcement that was made in December, and I'll just show the announcement. There it is. They're reviving a wartime housing program. Now, I remember wartime houses. My grandmother had one. And as I recall, there weren't a lot of different designs. Hers was 2 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchen, and then an open living and dining space. There was a basement. So, what the federal government is proposing to do is come up with a catalog of homes. Now, as they note here, in many instances, these homes were built in a period of about 36 hours. So, they want to bring forward a catalog of pre approved design ideas and then give them to builders. Now, let me just scroll down here a little further. There's a picture of some of them. Yeah, they were just tiny little boxes.
Hmm. Hmm.
So they're looking at pre-approved designs for multiplexes, for mid-rise buildings, student housing, seniors' residences, and other small to medium scale residential properties. And these will include garden suites and laneway homes and different kinds of houses that will solve today's challenges. So,
Hmm.
my wish would be that these would be accessible, or at the very least adaptable, because they are single story for the most part. I mean, there's the multi-rise, but they're single story in and of themselves. Um, it's the washroom primarily there, as well as the no step entry for the things that are such as garden houses and the
Hmm.
like. But having the Euro shower or a wet room, probably the wet room would be more in keeping
Yeah.
with the budget numbers that
Yeah.
they want to
Yeah.
stick with. That would be my wish, is that these designs would at the very least include, if not all be accessible, keeping in mind that the people who are going to be using these will want barrier free living to keep them healthier and safer longer. And again,
Hmm.
to reduce that impact on the healthcare system.
Absolutely. Yeah, that I mean that totally ties, back into the what I was talking about with my second wish, right?
Yes.
Is that we come up with these great ideas and these initiatives to tackle issues around affordable housing, for example, but we can't forget that we need to make sure that they're accessible. And when we're building new, uh, there's no reason to think that we can't do it. And the the wet room bathroom concept, it'd be kind of tight for somebody in a larger wheelchair, but if you take your very basic bathroom, which is typically 5 feet by 8 feet, that's a toilet, a sink, and a bathtub. If you turn that into a wet room, so it's just a toilet, a sink, and a shower area, um, you're not you're just making it a wet room, and you're not making the space bigger, so you're not making the house bigger. Uh, and if you just make sure that you grade your land so that there's no steps at the door, um, you're
Voila.
done. Yeah, and I think using the term adaptable probably, in terms of a kind of a marketing idea, makes more sense to people. I still think there's a stigma around this idea of accessibility being about people with disabilities, and far too many people go, I'll never get there. Like I'll never be there. Even when I'm 90, I won't be, I won't have a disability. I'll just be 90.
Yes, they will. I was thinking that firm that you mentioned that calls themselves 8 to 80 should call themselves Birth
Yeah,
to Death.
yeah,
Really,
yeah,
birth
yeah,
to
yeah,
death would be far more
yeah, yeah.
appropriate.
I can't help but think of a quote I heard from, her name is Eleanor Smith. So she started the concept of visitability, and I read in one of the articles that she wrote. So she started the visitability concept in the 80s, in Atlanta, and she said, a no-step entrance helps everyone and hurts no one. So you can't really I mean, you can fall at a no-step entrance, I guess, but stairs just only make it a little bit harder for so many people, right?
And a lot
So
harder
stairs,
for others.
yeah, there's no advantage to stairs really.
No.
um, and I would argue the same thing about the sort of this idea of the curbless shower area or the wet room. You're not really hurting anybody. You're just making a much more flexible bathroom space. You're not really changing the way you use things. Other than the fact that uh, we're used to kind of having bathtubs all the time too. So that's a bit of a thing, but um, it shouldn't be that hard to sort of sell those two features really. Uh, a kitchen is a whole nother issue that there's a big difference between I would say, an adaptable kitchen and an accessible kitchen. Um, where accessible kitchen, you would have a lot of space underneath the counters open, and therefore you lose a lot of valuable storage space and so on. So that's a bit of a tricky thing, but you can make your kitchen cabinets adaptable, so you can have cabinets under sinks and cooktops where you can pull them out if you need to, or put them back in if you want to, that kind of thing. So again, it needs some creative thinking, but a lot of this stuff, once it becomes more commonplace, like the engineered floor truss, once it becomes commonplace, it really becomes equal on par with just your standard costs of everything else.
Do you remember a show called Bewitched?
Oh yeah.
So it's on like the oldies channel, and I will
Yep.
occasionally watch it. I think I've probably seen them all 15 times, but it still amuses me. Early on in that series, Samantha had a kitchen with an oven in the wall and a stove that came out and she
Oh.
could push in.
Hmm.
I have never seen that anywhere other than in that show. But
Yeah.
what a great idea. Well, of course, you can't leave the elements on and push it back in. But regardless, the concept of being able to stow the things that you don't need,
Hmm.
fantastic. And
Yeah.
I did hear several years ago that condos were being built in downtown Toronto that didn't really have kitchens at all. They had a microwave because who lives in downtown Toronto that actually cooks? And now
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
air fryers and such that you can just sit on the counter that can do virtually anything an oven can do.
Yeah.
I mean, we're coming up with so many cool things, but there are a lot of cool things that already exist, like Euro showers and wet rooms and no step
Yeah.
entries that
Yeah.
we could do to make people's lives so much better. Tell me what you're going to focus on in the next year ahead.
Yeah, so it's kind of we've already kind of talked about it already, but the idea of what I would call small victories. So I would say it's fair to say about myself that I've always thought big in terms of my goals, uh, right from being a young person. This idea of making the world more accessible, right? And I've come to the realization as I'm in my 60th year, I guess you can say. That's a pretty tough goal. It's and sometimes I feel like I'm just beating my head against a wall. So I'm taking more joy, and I have been for the last year or so, more joy in what I would call the small victories. So just acknowledging that I'm not always changing the world, but I'm helping out a client who has a disability, and we're making that person's house more accessible, that family's house more accessible, allows them to do more things. One of the comments that I always take great pride in is when a client tells me that their 3 hour morning routine in the bathroom has been cut down to a half an hour a day. So that's 2.5 hours every single day of their lives now that is given back to playing with their kids, enjoying life, and not having to deal with the obstacles of a poorly designed bathroom. So those I guess in my mind those were more insignificant victories as I've been practicing as an architect, and I'm starting to realize that I should value those victories, those subtle changes more, because they are really helping, right? And I'm not going to change another architect's mind by saying, well, this is what you need to achieve. But if they can achieve um, a smaller goal in their design, so they're designing an industrial building or a small housing project, at least talk to your clients about making it more accessible and what that might look like. And maybe you don't do it all, but you do some things like the no step entrance. Maybe the house isn't super accessible inside, but you've got that no step entrance. Or or and again, the wet room would be a great thing as well. So I'm kind of just trying to embrace, and I think this has a lot to do with just being older. Just to embrace the day and enjoy the day, and try to do that education bit. We kind of one day at a time too. And I think that's sort of changed my perspective a bit. Uh, it's helped me kind of calm down and stress out a lot less about feeling like I'm not really helping. I'm sometimes my own worst enemy when I'm very critical of myself with these things. So just really enjoying uh, the day, and trying to at least make sure like this podcast, just make sure I take time out of my day to do something that feels to me worthwhile, and feels like I'm giving back in that way.
Right. Sounds like you have some very worthwhile goals. Because you're right, changing the life of one person and knowing that you made such a huge difference in their lives is everything. Like you can dine out on that for weeks. Really, I've done the same thing and had the same feeling. It's wonderful.
Mhm. Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
And I've really, in some respects, it's really, it's changed my life for sure. But I've also gained some really long relationships, and one that I'm sure I've mentioned in a previous podcast, but one that just comes to mind, which kind of ties all of my hopes together in a way, and is an example of that, is a house I did for a young man, Daniel Ennett, who is somewhat of a celebrity himself, and become well known here in the city of Edmonton. Um, a brilliant young guy in his 30s now, working on some productions of media, and putting together documentaries and other shows, using his knowledge. He ended up losing all four limbs to a disease. I know his mom always corrects me, but I just say meningitis. It's a more medical term, but essentially it's a form of meningitis. Um, and we designed a house for him to, interestingly enough, it ended up being a 4-level split home with ramps inside instead of stairs. And his life was so much better because he could operate a joystick on his wheelchair and just get around everywhere in the house. And he and his mom, it's just them that share the house. And he could say, "Mom, I'm going to my room," and she could say, "Yeah, okay, fine, go ahead. I'm just going to finish getting supper ready," that kind of thing. Their kitchen living area has been turned into a painting studio. They both paint now. Daniel's a fantastic artist. He's taken up photography. Needs some help getting his camera set up on his wheelchair. He's such a creative young guy, and I'd like to think that the house and the way he was able to grow up in the house offered him that kind of independence that gave him confidence to take on the challenges of just day-to-day living for a young person. And his maybe are a bit more challenging because of his um, missing limbs. But he figured out a way to make it work, and now he's thriving and doing well. His friends would always gather at his house, because it was hard for him to come to theirs. Uh, it normalized, the house was normal for his friends. They didn't think anything of it. So not only does Daniel understand and his mom understand what accessible housing is all about, but so do all of Daniel's friends and family and friends of his mom as well, right? And I class that I would teach, I'd bring my class to the home, and they would just often be stunned at how innovative and interesting the house is. And the young people, some of Daniel's friends were interested in becoming architects or getting into the design field, because their friend was Daniel, and they grew up in this, or they hung out in this interesting home. So it does go back to this idea of small um, small little deeds or small pieces of work can have that ripple effect, right? In terms of reaching other people and then getting us to that critical mass of people that understand how to make better housing in a better built environment.
Right. That's a lovely story to bring us to a conclusion on this podcast. Unless there's
Mhm.
another wish or hope or dream that you want to sneak in.
Uh, yeah, I hope to see my grandkids today.
I know. That's everything, isn't it? They're so delicious when they're young. And you've got some tiny ones.
I've got the oldest one. I've got five, and the oldest one is four. So yeah. I usually get a visit by either three of them or two of them, or all five sometimes, all at once. So let me tell you that sure picks up my day when I get to see them. That's for sure.
And you have to form those relationships now because there will come a time where it's not so cool. But
Maybe not.
they
Yeah,
will
yeah.
they will lean on that relationship and they will come
Mhm.
back to us later on. At least that's
I I
what I
th-
hope.
I think so. I certainly feel that with my own kids too. They like to come over and hang out with my wife and myself. So, um, not exactly sure how we did it, but we created a situation where our kids do. I feel like our kids really like us. So that's pretty awesome.
That is. Well, terrific. Well, thank you for joining me again on this podcast. And
Oh, you're
thank
welcome.
you to all of the people who have joined us for this podcast. And I look forward to seeing all of you on the next podcast, the next episode of Real Life Renos, the podcast.